and welcome to the follow-up podcast video thing for my Sonic Origins video review, Definitive or Disaster. Earlier this year, when I mentioned that I was going to try throwing myself into YouTube work, a friend suggested that I should do more follow-up podcasts like I did with my Definitive Sonic 3 video. You know, I did the main video that covered all the topics that I wanted to cover, and then during the process of recording that video and producing it and editing it and everything else, more information came out about Sonic 3, so I did that follow-up video. Well, that's kind of what I'm going to be doing here in a sense, though, you know, things didn't really change. Well, okay, no, things definitely changed while I was producing my video, but it's going to be a bit more general purpose. I'm going to be covering things that I didn't have time to talk about in the original video. I'm going to be replying to comments that I got on the video, you know, like questions and things like that. Just, you know, general more information, like replies to what people were saying, things like that. You remember when YouTube used to do video replies? That used to be a thing way back in the day. That's for old people to remember. And then corrections on things that I might have been wrong on, or things people didn't entirely understand me on because, you know, I worded it weird or whatever else, you know, just setting the record straight on different things. And you might be asking yourself, well, if you're the one that made this video, shouldn't you have like infinite time to talk about everything you'd want to talk about? And the answer is no, not really. Unlike some creators, I like having short videos. I want to respect the viewer's time. I mean, you know, maybe some of you out there are still like 22, 23, 24 years old, and you're like, you know, I got all the time in the world for everything. I'm older than that. And I appreciate a good, nice, compact, short video that is 30 minutes or less. You know, some of you out there making video essays that are 2 hours, 4 hours, 7 hours, 10 hours. I ain't got time for that. I don't know who has time for that. If you have time for that, time to produce that, and time to watch that, more power to you. I don't have that kind of time. I start to have a panic attack if one of my videos even gets over like 10 minutes over 30 minutes, because videos like that typically take me a month, 2 months, 3 months to put together. And I can't be spending that long on video production. And like, it's also just down to the way that I write things. You may remember, you know, I mentioned it in the video itself, that there was an entire alternate version of this video that I was working on. I recorded voiceover for it and everything. And then I threw that whole video out. I started over from scratch because Sonic Origins got patched. And it got patched enough that I felt like maybe I should just start over, because a lot of that original script was talking about things that don't exist anymore, that were patched out, fixed, you know, things like that. Not all of them. There are still, I mean, I'm just retreading ground at this point, but there are things in Sonic Origins that are still broken. But there were a lot of things that were fixed. And, you know, there was a lot of other reasons why I decided to throw that video out, you know, or not necessarily why I decided to throw it out, but why it took so long to the point where the game actually got patched before I was able to get my video out. And, you know, I said I was helping an aunt. She was having a moving sale that went on for, you know, 3.5, 4 weeks. I didn't mention it in the video, but I was also pet sitting for a cousin for a week and a half. And, you know, when I'm pet sitting for someone else, I don't have access to my desktop. And my laptop is like 12 and a half years old, so it can't really do much video editing. The hard drive is super small. It blue screens at random times if I'm even just looking at the internet, like if I'm browsing the web. Sometimes the whole laptop will just freeze up and crash, and there's kind of nothing I can do about it. At this point, I just need a new laptop, and I can't afford a new laptop. So when I'm not at home, when I'm not at my big main editing Windows PC, I can't do any video work, you know, remotely. It has to be at home. So if I'm pet sitting for a cousin or whatever for a week, 2 weeks, whatever, I can't edit videos. So there was like a whole segment of my life, like month and a half, maybe 2 months, where I couldn't work on the video hardly. But I got far enough along. I mean, again, this is retreading old ground, but I got far enough along. I wrote out the script. I was recording. I had all recorded and edited voiceover, and I was in the process of capturing footage for the video when the patch dropped. And, you know, at the time, I was just completely panicking. I was just freaking out because, oh my gosh, you know, so much of what I've written needs to be thrown away. And I ended up putting up the lost audio up on Patreon. That is up right now if you want to go listen to it. It is produced like a full-on podcast. You know, it has intro music, background music, sound comparison segments. I went all out, almost all out. It's not quite a finished product, but it is far enough along where you get the sense of what it sounded like. But while I was doing that, I realized that I didn't have to rewrite the whole script. I could have just cut out the parts that changed, you know, just rewrote select parts of the old script, and it probably would have been fine. And something else I found out while I was doing that is that I said things in that old script that I forgot to say in the new script. And that's because of the way my brain works. In the Patreon post I wrote about this, I likened it to like hiking a trail and how you never take the same footsteps, you know, the same places in the ground every single time you walk. You know, your feet are always landing in a different place every time you hike a trail. Something else, another metaphor you could think about it in is like a river, right? Every time you step in a river, it is different water. Because the river is always flowing. The river is always going in a direction. So the water you step in is never the same water twice. And that's kind of the way my brain works when I'm writing, is I prioritize this flow, this where ideas connect to each other, kind of like almost free form in a way. Like maybe that's bad, but I don't write things as just like a list of information. I kind of think of it like almost like a conversation in a sense, where maybe it's like rambling, maybe it's something, but all the ideas flow together into one coherent thought. I'm always going in a direction, and the stops I make along the way are never going to be the same twice. So this actually is a pretty interesting case study where I essentially had to write the same article twice, 2 months apart. And the structure and the order of that article, this script, is completely different in both cases. Like, the two might say some similar things, but the order that they get said in is different. The way I talk about them is different. Even if the information is exactly identical, the context in which it is brought up in is different. And that's just the weird way that my brain works. It's this river of ideas where all the thoughts are kind of flowing together into each other, and the way they flow together isn't always the same way twice. So this means that there were things that I meant to say in the script that I said in the first version of the script that didn't actually translate to the second version of the script because I just didn't think of them, and I didn't reread the old script to kind of bring me up to date on what needed to be in the new script. I just kind of, you know, played it by ear and just went, okay, well, you know, I think I need to talk about this, and this, and, you know, however that assembled in my head at the time was just the way it worked, the way it came out on the page, the way I read it, you know, everything like that. So, like I said, there are things that I said in the original version of the video that I should have said in the updated version of the script that I didn't. Like I talked about character selection in the original script and how weird it is, right? You can play as Knuckles in Sonic 1, you can play as Knuckles in Sonic 2, you can play as Knuckles in Sonic 3, but you can't play as Knuckles in Sonic CD. Sonic 2 also has an exclusive Knuckles and Tails mode that isn't in any of the other games. It's just really weird stuff like that. Just very, very odd. I think, I'm trying to remember, I don't think I mentioned this, but I meant, like, something else that I meant to talk about in the original video was that Super Tails changed too. And this is something I didn't say in the original video. I didn't say it in the updated video. But previously, if you've ever played and like 100% finished Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles, the way Tails works in those in that, you know, that locked on game is kind of weird. So you have Super Sonic, you have Super Knuckles, and then you have Hypersonic and Hyper Knuckles. And Super Sonic is acquired by getting all 7 Chaos Emeralds, and then you upgrade to Hypersonic by getting all 7 Super Emeralds, right? And the same is true of Super Knuckles and Hyper Knuckles. You get the Chaos Emeralds for one, and you get the Super Emeralds for the other. If you collect all 7 Chaos Emeralds as Tails, you don't get Super Tails. Instead, you have to get all 14 Emeralds in order to unlock Super Tails. Well, for Sonic Origins, they changed that. Now, you get the 7 Chaos Emeralds as Tails, you get Super Tails, which is just Tails, but he's faster and invincible now. And then once you get all the Super Emeralds, you unlock a brand new Hyper Tails, which is effectively just what Super Tails originally was, where he has the flickies that fly around him and chase him around and things like that. So that was something else that was brand new for Sonic Origins that I didn't talk about. But yeah, it's just, sorry, like, my brain is weird, I guess. I mean, I don't know. Maybe this is something that all writers do. Maybe I'm just normal. Wouldn't that be something? But like, the long and short of it is that basically I shouldn't have spent all that time like stressing out over having to rewrite my entire script, because the original script probably would have been fine. And not only would it have been fine, but I think it says more in less space, right? Even though if you go listen to the podcast that I put up on Patreon, it's over 40 minutes long. I think it's a more compact script. I think it says more in less space. And I think it would have been fine. Is basically what I'm trying to say. Next up is comment responses. I had a bunch of people asking me about, or not even necessarily asking me, but just talking about them, about Sonic 1 Forever and Sonic 2 Absolute. And my thinking here is that I could probably do like an entire video on these games, I don't know, maybe I still will, but just to cover them real quick here, for those of you who don't know what these things are, about 6 months before Sega announced Sonic Origins, a Sonic Retro user named Rubber Ducky Cooley reverse engineered and decompiled the phone versions of Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 and ported them to Windows. And they were kind of basic ports. You know, they were functional, they were playable, but they had like really basic menu systems, and you know, it was weird, but it was playable and it was cool. For the first time ever, you could finally play the phone versions of Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 on your personal computer. And you know, since these were fan projects, that essentially made them open source. Anyone could come in and modify Rubber Ducky Cooley's code. They could add new things to the games. It was even like an unofficial open source version of Retro Engine itself, right? So that meant that these games were very moddable. You could just go in and change the code yourself, and it basically made them into like the most user-friendly way to hack and modify Sonic 1 and Sonic 2. It was very easy to add levels, it was very easy to change the way characters functioned. It was a playground for people who like to modify Sonic games, essentially. And this was about, maybe I said this earlier, but it was about 6 or maybe like 9 months before Sega officially announced Sonic Origins. And what ended up happening from there is that a team called Team Forever came in, and they produced Sonic 1 Forever and Sonic 2 Absolute. And this added like a whole brand new menu system. It added all these extra bonus options, like, you know, Sonic Mania's Dropdash was added. All these little, just tiny little tweaks and different toggleable options that you could do to, I mean, essentially make them the definitive way to play Sonic 1 and 2. It was significantly more than even what Sega gave us for Sonic Origins. And it was pretty cool, right? I mean, you had all these options. Like, from what I remember, the phone versions of Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 allowed you to have these Sonic 3 shields, right? But it could only be enabled, I think, through like the debug mode menu. You didn't have the option to just do it by yourself at any other time. You had to like input cheat codes to play around with features like that. Like, I think there was even like a Sonic and Tails mode for Sonic 1 that again could only be accessed via debug mode. Sonic 1 Forever and Sonic 2 Absolute just throws those all into its options menu, where you can just toggle those on and off at your pleasure. You know, it's pretty cool. But the reason I didn't talk about these games is because, I mean no disrespect to Rubber Ducky Cooley or Team Forever, but these decompilations just don't run very well on my computer. I get like weird stuttering and frame rate drops, and I know that there was an update not that long ago to like try and improve frame pacing, because apparently the way it serves new frames in the rendering engine is apparently super weird. And it's still there apparently, like, you know, even though there was an update to improve frame pacing, it's still, you know, it's still what it is. It's still not super great. At least on my computer. I know my computer isn't exactly a spring chicken anymore. I mean, I originally built this thing in 2015, so, you know, it's getting up there in years. I need to build a new one, but also, these are like 10-year-old phone games of 30-year-old Genesis games. I shouldn't need like a super powerful CPU and the latest graphics card to run old pixel art games, you know what I'm saying? And I know that Sonic Origins itself doesn't stutter like this on my PC either, even with the Nouveau. Like the recordings, that's another case entirely. You know, you may have noticed during the video that the recordings did stutter every now and then. That's just, again, my computer's getting old. The Nouveau is what it is. It's just, that's just the way it has to be. But just in general, Rubber Ducky Cooley's versions of the Sonic 1 and 2 mobile phone ports just don't seem very stable on my computer. So I was kind of hesitant to talk about them a little bit. Though saying that, I now remember something else that I wanted to talk about and didn't get a chance to in the video itself, and that's the fact that Sonic Origins is being run through Hedgehog Engine 2, the same tech that powered Sonic Forces. Which is like weird, right? These are really old Sega Genesis games. These are pretty old phone versions. And they're running through this modern, you know, you need like a modern graphics card and a modern computer to play these games, because the menu system is written in Hedgehog Engine 2, this super modern, super advanced, you know, next generation engine for PS4 and PS5 and things like that. What that basically means is that even though my old 12-year-old laptop can run Rubber Ducky Cooley's decompilations of Sonic 1 and 2, it can't even boot Sonic Origins. Even though, like, technically speaking, these games are so old, there's no reason my laptop shouldn't be able to run these games, right? Even if that laptop is 12 years old, the games it is trying to run are even older. And it's not like the Hedgehog Engine 2 menu system in Sonic Origins is like super necessary either. It's just like this weird island thing where it reuses assets from Sonic Generations. It doesn't do anything but make it harder for older systems to play this collection. That background menu system in Sonic Origins could have been like a video or something like that, and it would have accomplished the exact same thing, but for whatever reason, they decided to use Hedgehog Engine 2 and decided that, you know, people who don't have modern computers shouldn't be able to play Sonic Origins, and that's pretty annoying. It is completely pointless that they did that. One other comment I got was that Sega could use the original music for Sonic 3, but they're just too greedy to pay the licensing or whatever. I think that this is a fair expectation for a corporation, which are, pretty notoriously greedy. But I really don't think that's the situation with Sonic 3. The issue at hand here is that people who worked with Michael Jackson and are credited in the music composition for Sonic 3 are claiming that Sega owes them unpaid royalties. I actually had a pretty popular video about this topic if you want to go check that out. But something you need to keep in mind is that depending on how long this has been going on, Sega could owe those musicians millions of dollars. And assuming Sega would have to relicense the music from these people again, they might not even want to work with Sega anymore at all. And if they did, they might be asking huge, insane amounts of money for licensing. More than Sega would ever even be willing to pay. It may actually be totally impossible for Sega to work with these people ever again, because Sega burned them and they kind of want to burn Sega back. So you just have to be realistic with your expectations and your understanding of what's really going on here. It's probably not as simple as Sega simply paying them what they're owed. Especially if you take a step back and kind of look at the whole thing, as a big picture and kind of see that it almost looks like there's a little bit of a cover-up going on here. To me, it's a little suspicious that the prototype of Sonic 3 that was discovered was from, I think, October or November of 1993, but it doesn't contain Michael Jackson's music. The big scandal around Michael Jackson happened in August of 1993. And if you believe that the scandal was part of the reason he departed from Sonic 3, doesn't it seem weird that they had replacement music in the game and ready to go 2 months later, and yet the final retail cartridge that shipped to stores apparently still had Michael Jackson's music in it? Even though Sega of America's own Roger Hector says that's not Michael Jackson's music? But it is. It's been confirmed now by both Brad Buxer and Yuji Naka. That is Michael Jackson's music. Or at least music composed by people that worked with Michael Jackson and helped him produce his music. So you have this situation where one side of Sega is saying Michael Jackson's music was never in Sonic 3. You have another side of Sega that is saying Michael Jackson's music was in Sonic 3. You have a version of Sonic 3 from potentially after he left the project that doesn't contain his music, but then the version that was sold in stores has his music. And on top of that, Sega has spent 30 years basically avoiding telling anyone who made which songs in Sonic 3. It almost feels like a conspiracy, doesn't it? But that's the thing. We don't know exactly when or why Michael Jackson left Sonic 3. We don't know if he left of his own accord. We don't know if Sega kicked him out. We just know that at some point he left. And those circumstances are unknown. And we don't know when it happened. We just know that he left. So it is possible that even though the Sonic 3 prototype was dated October 1993 or whenever it was, that Michael Jackson was still involved in the project at that time. We don't know. But if it was a reaction to the scandal was in August. So in theory, we could say that Michael Jackson was kicked off Sonic 3 in either mid-August or early September. Sega might have then replaced his music before October, and then between October 1993 and the release of Sonic 3 in February of 1994, somebody might have put Michael Jackson's music back into Sonic 3. And then, years and years and years later, those musicians that, composed the music realized what was going on and threatened to sue Sega over it. That might be something that's happening. Or it could all just be a weird misunderstanding. But the whole point is, regardless of the weird tinfoil hat conspiracy theory that I just put out there were musicians credited on Sonic 3 that felt Sega wasn't paying them for their work, and they were preparing to sue Sega over it. And now, even if Sega paid them what they're owed, they probably aren't going to want to work with Sega ever again. Because, 10 years, 20 years went by where they weren't being paid. So even if Sega said, okay, we want to pay you guys, how much is it going to cost us? Well, those musicians, Bobby Brooks and Sirocco Jones, could say, well, give us $50 million. Because, they, again, like I said, they were burned by Sega. They want to burn Sega back in return. Greed doesn't even come into the picture anymore. It's sore feelings at this point. And that's just the way it's going to be. Don't even blame Sega of today for this. This was a mistake made by Sega 30 years ago. The people that worked at Sega 30 years ago don't work at Sega today. I mean, there are some of them, like Takashi Iizuka, he still works at Sega. But most of them, Yuji Naka, Naoto Oshima, the core Sonic team back in the Genesis days, Hirokazu Yasuhara, all those guys, they've moved on since then. Roger Hector doesn't work at Sega anymore. Tom Kalinske doesn't work at Sega anymore. Some people, have straight up died in the years since Sonic 3. The Sega of 1994 doesn't exist anymore, so don't blame the Sega of 2022 for those mistakes, because those mistakes were made by other people many, 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 many years ago. And the financial situation that Sega is in today is very different than it was back in 1994. There are so many different factors that prevent blame from being laid at anyone's feet, or at least blame for people that currently work at Sega. It's just the way it is. Someone 30 years ago made a mistake, and we are paying for it now, and that's just the way it's got to be. Like I said, no amount of YouTube comments, no amount of complaining on Twitter, none of it will ever change what happened 30 years ago, because it already happened. You can't stop it. You can't go back in time and change it. That's just the way it is, and you just have to live with it, or find an quote-unquote alternative method to play Sonic 3. Final segment here is corrections. I strive to be factual and accurate with my videos, but more often than not, I go off my memory, and my memory isn't always super correct. I'll remember something as being one way, and then I have a bad habit of not fact-checking my own memory, and I just go with what I remember as being true, and sometimes, we'll say like 40% of the time, I might be wrong. Or maybe I'll weird something in a weird way. Maybe I'll word something in a weird way, and people won't understand what I'm trying to say. So I just want to clear the air, right? I want to be truthful. I want to own up to my mistakes. So we're going to talk about corrections. A lot of people corrected me about the soundtrack for Sonic 3, because with the way I worded it, I made it sound like these songs were from the 1997 PC version. Again, that's just the weird way that I worded it. I didn't necessarily mean it the way it sounded. The songs that are in Sonic Origins, in the Sonic 3 version of Sonic Origins, are both from the October 1994 prototype of Sonic 3 and from the 1997 PC version of Sonic & Knuckles Collection. Technically speaking, the songs that are used in Sonic Origins don't necessarily match either version of the game. A lot of the instrumentation has been subtly changed. Some of them are more based on the PC version than others. Some of them sound closer to the prototype than others. Some are like completely new compositions, like Supersonic has a completely new song that was never in any version of Sonic 3 ever released. And some of that is down to, during production of Sonic Origins, the current Sonic brand manager, Katie, said that somewhere that Jun Senoue was retouching a lot of the alternate songs. So maybe he has access to versions that we've never heard. Maybe he used the PC version as a basis. Maybe he used the prototype as the basis. We don't know. But the point is that the versions of the music in Sonic Origins are based on the alternate compositions from either the prototype or the PC version, but that most of them have been modified in some way. They are not exact, identical replicas. Some of them are, but most of them aren't. Most of them are a completely separate third version of these compositions that nobody's ever heard of before. And if that still sounds confusing, I'm sorry, because it is pretty confusing. Somebody else pointed out that when I mentioned GoGame as the team that ported, at the very least, Sonic CD in Sonic Origins, I mentioned that they were from Singapore. Apparently all the names listed in the Sonic CD credits are Vietnamese names. I will own up to that as just being, a dumb mistake I made as a stupid American. I'm not worldly enough to know at a glance what a Vietnamese name looks like. It is very possible that GoGame in Vietnam ported Sonic CD. All I did was search Sega GoGame, and it looked like their main base of operations was in Singapore, so that's what I put in the video. I'm sorry for making that mistake. That is totally on me. I also claim that the Sonic CD pencil test wasn't in the game, when apparently it actually is. In my defense, it's in kind of a weird place, and it's super easy to miss. So, in Sonic Origins, you have the museum, right? That's where you see all the cutscenes, that's where you see the 30th anniversary concert clips, and below the 30th anniversary concert clips are pencil tests for all of these Sonic Origins cutscenes, right? They have pencil tests for Sonic Mania Adventures, too. It's like a whole pencil test section. One would think and expect the logical thing would be to put the Sonic CD pencil test in there with the rest of the pencil tests. They don't do that. Instead, the Sonic CD pencil test is back where it originally was in the Sega CD version. You may have remembered I mentioned that the version of Sonic CD in Origins goes back and uses the original menu system from the Sega CD version. Well, they also put the pencil test in there too. Basically in Sonic CD, the way you would unlock the pencil test was by doing the time attack mode. And the time attack mode would list your overall time for completing all stages, as one single number. It would be like, you completed the whole game in 39 minutes and 40 seconds or whatever, right? And that was your cumulative time for adding together all of the times for all of the stages in the game. If you got that cumulative time under 25 minutes and 46 seconds, it would unlock a special visual mode, which would contain its own cutscene viewer, as well as the Sonic CD pencil test. And that's where it is now. It's in Sonic CD. It's not with the rest of the pencil tests in the museum section where it should be. It is hidden in Sonic CD itself. It's still there. It's very weird and super dumb, and I don't really understand why they did that. Again, it goes back to the idea that Sonic Origins has major problems with consistency. Nothing in that collection is consistent. I would truly believe that different people ported every single game in that collection, because every single port in that collection has a different standard of quality, and none of them match up. None of them feel like part of the same thing. They all have different features. They all have different everything. It's weird. This next one is something I noticed right as the finished video was uploading to YouTube, and several people have commented on it since then, but basically the Dropdash in Sonic CD is also fully functional. Only Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 have the weird clunky Dropdashes that don't really work right. Obviously, the Dropdash in Sonic CD works right, or else you wouldn't be able to use it to time travel, which is something I actually demonstrate twice in the video. That's kind of how I noticed that, I was technically wrong as I was writing down the subtitles, the closed captioning file for the video, and I noticed, wait a minute, if the Dropdash doesn't work right, why am I able to use it to time travel? And, I figured, well, at that point it's too late. The video was basically already uploaded for the most part. I just kind of had to live with it. And then I had a couple people be like, hey, you're wrong about this. And it's like, well, yeah, I know. So again, Dropdash and Sonic CD, it's fine. That was just me being a bonehead. Again, that's my mistake. I'm sorry. The last correction comes from near the end of the video, where I mentioned that Knuckles Chaotix has never been re-released on anywhere besides the 32X. A couple people have pointed out now that that's technically not true, as the game was playable on GameTap via PC. For those of you who don't know about or can't remember GameTap, it was basically like an early competitor to Steam, and it offered free games and other entertainment. So, for example, GameTap had original episodes of Space Ghost Coast to Coast, after the show had ended its main run on Adult Swim. Instead of interviewing musicians or movie stars or whatever, Space Ghost would interview game developers. I think there was an episode where he interviewed, I want to say Sid Meier, and maybe, gosh, who else? Tim Schafer, I think, might have been on an episode of the GameTap Space Ghost Coast to Coast. I don't know. GameTap also invested early on in the concept of episodic gaming, so like if you wanted to play the latest episode of Telltale's Sam and Max series, you went to GameTap because that's where it premiered. And I'm talking like the very first season of Sam and Max, technically what is now known as Sam and Max Save the World. And they had like original content too. They had an original game called American McGee's Grimm, where you played as like a nasty little man running around ruining fairy tales. It was kind of like Katamari Damacy. Like the idea is you'd be presented with like the sanitized kid-friendly version of a fairy tale, and then Grimm would come in and kind of like pee all over everything and fart everywhere, and it would kind of corrupt the stories to make them like dark and creepy and violent, and kind of like the original version of the fairy tales from like way back when. Like, because, he was Grimm. He was supposed to be the guy who wrote the fairy tales to begin with, even though, the brothers Grimm were the ones that... It's a whole thing. Like, don't even worry about that. All you just need to know is that, like, American McGee's Grimm was kind of bad and weird, but it had, like, 3 seasons? And it was all an original GameTap creation. I think... So, like, now, if you want to play American McGee's Grimm, I think they sell it for like $10, and you get like all 24 episodes. I wouldn't recommend it because, I played most of those games as they came out, because I think new episodes of Grimm were free, and you had to pay for like season packs after the fact. It was really weird. Anyway, GameTap like eventually also got into emulating like old games, because it was around that time, we'll say like 2005, 2006. I think Nintendo had just announced the Virtual Console for the Nintendo Wii. So GameTap was like, hey, that's a good idea, putting old games out again. So they started, releasing emulator packs for GameTap. It was kind of the usual stuff that we're all used to nowadays. It was the same Sega Genesis games, it was the same Neo Geo games that are basically everywhere nowadays. But back then, back in 2005 and 2006, it was like a novelty, It was, because there weren't very many Neo Geo collections back then. And that's where Knuckles Chaotix ended up hitting, was on GameTap, on their Sega Genesis emulator, technically a 32X emulator, as it were. I mean, they were, even promising future platforms. They were talking about putting Sega Saturn games on GameTap. They were talking about putting Dreamcast games on GameTap. Apparently, like, as the legend goes, a coder at GameTap was putting the finishing touches on a Sega Saturn emulator that would allow them to put out Panzer Dragoon Saga onto GameTap. When the news came down, like the memo that, hey, GameTap's out of money, we're shutting the business down. Like, literally, he was 24 hours away from releasing this emulator. Again, as the legend goes. I don't know if that's actually true or not. Don't quote me on that. But that's the way I heard it, is that, it was 24 or 48 hours before his emulator with Panzer Dragoon Saga was going to go out on GameTap, and that was going to be the first time anyone outside of a Sega Saturn was going to be able to play Panzer Dragoon Saga. And then the whole company just basically shut down overnight. GameTap wasn't like really a great service or anything, but looking back on it now, it was a lot like Xbox Game Pass is nowadays. It was, subscription based. You'd pay a flat fee to get access to a library of games. And then, of course, they'd have like free games. Like I think those Genesis games, some of them might have been free. It's like Gunstar Heroes, Sonic the Hedgehog, again, the usual suspects. And then they would have other like bigger name games that would be free. Like GameTap was where I played the original Psychonauts. Because, for a period, I think it was like October 2005, it was free for like a whole month. So I was like, oh man, now's my chance to play Psychonauts. And I did. I played most of the way through Psychonauts back then. Though I remember getting all the way to the end of the game, to the final level, which, if you've played Psychonauts, I'm not going to spoil how that game ends, but there is a level that is full of like this fire effect that is going constantly. And I remember my computer at the time just wasn't good enough to render that fire effect. So I got all the way through the game, all the way to basically the final challenge, and the last level ran like total garbage on my computer, and I had to... It wasn't until many, many years later that I replayed through Psychonauts. Maybe I even watched it on YouTube. I don't know. I remember beating Psychonauts, I thought. But I had to wait until I rebuilt my computer like years and years later. But yeah, I said Knuckles Chaotix was never on anything besides the 32X. That's technically a lie. It was on GameTap. And that's it. That's the whole podcast. I don't know if this was a mess or not. Instead of reading from a script this time, I decided to just kind of do it all off the top of my dome. I did have notes, like pretty detailed notes too, because actually, like if I'm being honest, I tried to record a different version of this podcast like a week ago, and my notes were super, super simple. It was like 1 page of notes. And that podcast was a mess. Because I went in, like, the notes were so simple that I would just go into full-on ramble mode so easily, and I'd never get back on topic. So I said, okay, this is a mess. I can't put this podcast out. I need to start over. So I wrote way more detailed notes. So, I went from 1 page, maybe like a page and a half of notes, to 7 pages of notes. So hopefully this podcast turned out all right. As one last thing before we go, I'd like to thank all of my new Patreon donors, because holy crap, this Sonic Origins video, I had like zero faith that Sonic Origins video would do any kind of numbers at all. I figured I was too late. Like I said, striking while the iron was hot, things were going to be ice cold for me. Apparently not. I think I'm up closing in on 50,000 views for that video right now, which isn't like a runaway explosive success like I've had on other videos, but it's pretty good. Like I'm not unhappy with this at all. And okay, well, it's up to 42. I thought it was up to like 46. Huh. I wonder if YouTube's analytics goofed up or something. Anyway, not only did I get not only has the views been pretty okay, but I also got like 7 new Patreon donors, that's probably like the most this Patreon has ever grown since I launched it in 2016, 2015, somewhere around there. So, just thank you to Alt F4 Games, Aaron CT, Gadget Feather, Brad M, Mark Bradshaw, that's an old friend of mine, CA Starman, Jason H. Holy crap, you guys. This is the kind of thing where, as I throw myself more and more into YouTube and try and do higher quality, more regular uploads, this kind of stuff is what makes it feel like it might all work out after all. That I might actually be able to support myself exclusively through YouTube. I can't quite do it yet. I have about enough to pay basic groceries every month. And even then I really have to budget super, super tightly to make sure that I don't overspend and start spending out of my savings. But it's a good feeling to know that I might be able to pull this off. So I just want to thank you guys for making this possible and hopefully more possible in the future. Hopefully this podcast wasn't a disaster, because I never can tell, I get into a rambling mode and I just go. Again, my brain is but a leaf floating down the river. And maybe if you think this was interesting, maybe I'll make this a regular thing for all of my big videos going forward. Leave a comment and we'll see what happens. Until next time.